Well, thank you, Shannon, and it's great to be with you all. Congressman Curtis John, great to see you, and thank you for those remarks. You know, I've been a Democrat and working in a very Republican state for a long time, and people sometimes ask me how you get things done in that regard. And I always say that I think the first thing is to recognize where you have common values with people maybe who disagree with you. And when I think about that, I oftentimes think of John Curtis. We oftentimes actually agree, but we oftentimes disagree as well. But I will tell you, we almost always have the same why. Why do we do this job? Because we love this state, we love this country, and we want to serve and give back. So we may differ on how, but when we agree on why, how is just a detail to work out. And I think, you know, I have a theory that if we could send more mayors to Congress, we could fix what's broken about Washington. And so great to be with you, Congressman Curtis. Thank you for what you bring to the job. So welcome to the Mormon Environmental Stewardship Alliance Symposium. It's an honor to be with you today. As Shannon mentioned, I'm Congressman Ben McAdams. I have the pleasure of representing Utah's 4th Congressional District. So for those of you who aren't familiar, my district is unique in that it's primarily a suburban district, unlike Congressman Curtis, who represents a lot of rural Utah. My district encompasses growing communities in Salt Lake and Utah counties. And also I represent rural parts of the state too in Sanpete and Juab counties. But regardless of where we live, something I know that all Utahns have in common is a love for the land we live on. We are blessed in Utah to be surrounded by the most incredible natural beauty. And when I look at that distinction, as I said earlier, about why and how, if we can recognize that people across the state of Utah love this land. Now, we may disagree. There are disagreements from some of the environmentalists, Mayor Curtis described Mayor of Moab, environmentalists in more urban areas, or ranchers in rural areas. How we love the land, there's disagreement, but we love the land. And if we can recognize that there's that common value that brings us together, how we love the land is a detail that we work out. But if we can recognize in each other the dignity and respect of having pure motives for the land, I think that's a starting point for building common ground. So as I was saying, we are blessed to live in Utah, to be surrounded by some of the world's most incredible natural beauty. We in this state have 5 of the nation's premier national parks, actually 6 now, because the Golden Spike was just designated a national park, so we have 6 national parks. We have world-class ski resorts, untamed rivers, and wild rangeland that families have been grazing their cattle on dating back to their pioneer ancestors. Our land provides for us in so many different ways, and we're responsible to care for this place that we call home. Some of us, I think, were lucky enough to be born here. Others moved here when they saw what we have. But one thing is consistent. We all choose to continue to live here, and we all have a responsibility to preserve this land that we use. For me, our natural heritage has always grounded me in the work that I do. I have fond memories growing up along the Wasatch Front. And these Wasatch Mountains were a place for me. How many, you leave Utah or people come back to Utah, and one thing that people always say is they miss the mountains. In fact, it's so hard to know sometimes when you've moved away from Utah which direction's north, because we just know those mountains on the east, or depending on where you live, but along the Wasatch Front, the mountains to the east help you know which direction's north and which direction's south. I think those mountains have also, so as they're a compass for us as we're navigating around the valley, I also found them to be a compass in my life. I found solace in those mountains. I have fond memories of going to those mountains with my siblings and my family as a scout, camping in these mountains and hiking. And then, like Congressman Curtis described, as in college and in my professional career, I've gone to these mountains to find myself, to find peace, and to be alone in my thoughts and escape into these canyons and wander around these mountains. And I think in many ways, this exposure has shaped my values, it shaped my character, and helped to inform my politics. And I enjoy today hiking with my wife and our kids and spending time in these outdoors. And I hope they learn to love these our outdoors as much as I do. My faith and knowledge that this earth is a gift to us from heavenly parents instills in me a deep sense of responsibility to care for the place where I grew up. I want to make sure that the Central Wasatch and all the rivers, the mountains, the desert landscapes, the canyons are still well preserved for my children to explore and to find their own adventures. The management and stewardship decisions that we make now are going to determine the future of our environment, whether it's supporting wildlife, but also supporting our way of life. So much of the water that we drink, that sustains life in this state of Utah, depends upon our mountains and how we take care of them. And I think we have an imperative to act now for climate change and environmental stewardship if we want our kids and our grandkids to continue our traditions of communing in nature and to live in a clean and healthy environment. And, you know, I was asked to talk a little bit about climate change and why climate change is important to me, and it is. I often find as a public servant, when I'm talking to my constituents about climate change, the most powerful and compelling reason to care are the ones that are immediate and local. And so thinking about our water and thinking about our air quality and thinking about the natural places that we love and cherish as Utahns, I think is the first and most immediate reason why we care about this earth. I've also been in Utah politics long enough to know that we have some opinions around land management, around environmental stewardship, and around climate change. We've had decades of sometimes very contentious and sometimes very divisive conversations about how this land and our environment should be managed and how we should conserve it. And I know we all approach those conversations passionately, but the fact that we have a passion for stewardship of our land is an incredibly good thing. Coming back to the why, if we can take a step back from our passionate disagreements about how we are stewards of the land and recognize that why we're all stewards of the land because it is a source of our livelihood, whether it's tourism or ranching or other. It's life sustaining, and recognize that value that's common among all of us. I think that's a starting point. It means we care deeply about this place that we call home and how it's treated and how we preserve it for future generations. For my entire career as a public servant, I've tried to create collaborative and balanced approaches to public policy. I appreciate Congressman Curtis's words also around how to do that and how to inspire people to stay at the table as we discuss how we employ our duty, I think I would say our God-given duty as stewards of this earth. Balanced approaches to public policy. And in Congress, I've continued this, making sure that every bill I introduce has two things that are important to me, whether it's environmental legislation or any other piece of legislation. One, the question that I ask myself is it good for Utah? And two, I always make sure that it's bipartisan. I'm currently serving where in a house where Democrats have the majority. But so it's sometimes easy to pass through a bill through the House on Democratic only votes. That's not a wise way to do things if you want to build consensus with a Senate and with a president, and if you want to get something done. And so I believe that a starting point for any piece of legislation, environmental or otherwise, must be bipartisan. When it comes to environmental stewardship and creating policy for us to address climate change, we all start from a place of wanting solutions that lead building a healthy and sustainable environment. In Congress, I actually, this week, 2 of my healthy environment bills passed in the House. The first bill was one that supports solar energy research and development and deployment of solar energy within the Department of Education. Utah is a national leader when it comes to innovative solar technology and development, and we are projected to produce over 1,000 megawatts of solar energy in the next 5 years. This legislation that I passed helps to boost our already growing solar energy industry, further promoting clean energy as a resource and learning to live sustainably within our environment. This legislation creates clean energy jobs, where in Utah, there are already thousands employed in that very sector. The second bill that I passed tackles Utah's air quality problem. We're all too familiar with this issue. We know what it's like to live with bad air. And my bill combats ozone pollution that's so bad in the summer months, and learning to tackle our air quality challenges. You know, there's no single solution to our air quality problems, as we've learned here in Utah, and there's no single solution to addressing climate change. But I firmly believe that we must take on this issue from several sides to develop meaningful solutions as we seek to move forward. You know, being a father, just in conclusion, let me say that being a father has furthered my passion for this issue by making thoughtful decisions today about how we care for national parks and natural spaces. And I know that we're caring for a planet that we will leave to our children and to our grandchildren. And it's important to me to see that, to see compromise and collaboration as virtues, and action on our beliefs as a pillar of our faith. It's important to preserve our natural landscape and to work together so the next generation can look to us as examples instead of cautionary tales about how we cared for the earth. And I believe that as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our faith tells us that we need to care for the earth that sustains life and offers beauty and refuge from our busy lives. Just in conclusion, we're blessed to live in Utah with all the natural world has to offer. I know this work always comes with a lot of passion from across the political spectrum, but when we're sitting down and willing to work together to find solutions, I think we're on the right track. The need for stewardship and action on the climate crisis is now, and we have a responsibility to our heritage and to our children to make the right choices for the future. So thank you, and let me just turn it back to Shannon. I know that we've got some questions. I want to make sure we leave time for those questions as well.
Thank you so much, Representative McAdams. That was excellent. We did receive some questions from earlier in the week, and we received one this morning. So if you do have more questions, please enter them in the Q&A box. The first question that we can start with is, how can we work in a bipartisan manner for environmental stewardship generally and climate change specifically? And you're both phenomenal at bipartisan work, so tell us what you do.
I'll jump in because I think Ben did a really good job of outlining in his remarks some of his efforts. And Ben makes a really good point. Right now, if you really want to pass serious legislation, if you're really serious about it, you've got to find people on both sides of the aisle to support your legislation. And there's a lot of legislation that's introduced in Congress that people just kind of smile and it feels good, but there's no chance of it ever passing. So let me just echo Ben's point of working across the aisle, finding those areas of common ground. And in reality, there are so many of them, and finding those and then pushing legislation forward.
I would also add, you know, again, I think I'm an optimist. I like to joke that if, as proof of my optimism, I ran for office as a Democrat in Utah. But I always, you know, let's acknowledge there are bad ideas that come out of both political parties, and there are bad people, bad actors that come out of both political parties. I always choose to start from a place of optimism and to believe that the person I'm sitting across from, we may be passionately disagreeing, but they, like I, love our country. And the reason they're so passionate about their position is because they believe their position is important to preserving what we love about America and what we love about Utah, and a path forward to make our country a better place. And allowing someone who you disagree with the dignity that their opinion is warranted and well motivated, and not, you know, far too often today we call somebody, we say, oh, you're a sellout, you're corrupt, you're, you know, you ascribe a whole bunch of negative things to different people. And once you've said that, how do you negotiate with somebody who's the very motives underlying their position are unrecognizable and intolerable? There's really no place to go from there. But if you can recognize that the person who may disagree with you is well motivated, and maybe if I can understand their position better, I might, and see it from their side, I might agree with them, and they might also agree with me. That's the starting point for conversation. And I think that's true for environmental discussions, but it's also true for any type of legislation we're trying to get done. So right now, I think at the root of that is knowing people who you serve with and having respect for them. And far too often today, I think public servants only talk to each other on a split screen on a cable TV show. And that's not the greatest place for building respect or common understanding. So I think we need to start with expecting, whether you're in public service or whether you're coworkers in the office place, start with respect and respecting the dignity of somebody who disagrees with you, and then have those conversations. Don't pull back because they disagree, but continue to have those conversations and try to understand what somebody else's position.
Excellent. Thank you both. So another question that I'll just shorten that came in this morning is, how can we encourage our church or civic leaders to take action as citizens? What do you think?
So I hear a lot of times that people wish the church would make a statement. And sometimes what we want is right in front of us. And if you go to the church's website, there's an amazing statement about being stewards over the earth. And I think, kind of like I alluded to in my remarks, this is much like every other gospel principle. If we want somebody to stop smoking or stop using alcohol, what principles would we use? I would ask all of us, including myself, are we really using the principles of prayer and fasting as we try to change hearts? How often are we just reverting to man's way as we try to change hearts? And I really think the gospel is rich with ideas in how to persuade people to be better stewards.
There's a famous quote, I'm forgetting who said it now, but that, people oftentimes try to claim that God's on my side. And more importantly, we should be asking, am I on God's side? Now, we had some social media posts on my page this week, and I always should preface this by saying, never read the comments, right? And then follow it up by telling people about the comments that I read. But we had a post about some of these bills that I was pushing this week. And somebody said that as a member of the church, I just need to trust that God has a plan, that we don't need to care for the environment, that God has a plan for this earth and he will fix everything. And I don't mean to say God's on my side, because I do think there's reasonable room for people to disagree. I think my legislation was good, but there are well-intended, well-motivated people have reasons to oppose my legislation, and it doesn't mean they don't care about the earth. But this person said that we don't need to worry about the earth. And I think of some of the principles that motivate us as members of the church. Do we say the word of wisdom doesn't matter because the day will come that we will be resurrected and our bodies will be made whole? I think we're taught to believe, to take responsibility for our actions today. We believe that we will be redeemed, and we believe in an atonement, but it's after all that we do. Our efforts matter, and God expects us to use our best efforts to care for those things in our stewardship, whether it's a family or whether it's your own health, or whether it's the earth and the time that we are entrusted to be stewards of this earth. We are expected to be stewards of it, not to say it's just somebody else's responsibility and God will take care of it. And so, I think that, there's reasons to agree or disagree with my legislation, but I think the underlying principle, the why, is we should be good stewards of this earth. We can disagree about how, but I don't agree that this is a responsibility we can take off of our shoulders. We have a responsibility as stewards of the earth to care for this place that's been entrusted to us.
Thank you. That's wonderful. We have another question that's come through the chat this morning. It says, how can we let the truth, as clarified by the scientific community, guide our earth stewardship?
I'm not sure you really want me to answer this one. I just think people need to let science go. Why do you demand that I believe your science for me to be motivated to take care of the earth? And we try over and over and over again to motivate people with science. Science doesn't have to be the reason I care about the earth. And as a matter of fact, it's not. And I'll bet it's not for most of you. I'll bet you care about the earth and then you use science to validate why you care about the earth. Well, I don't think science makes anybody care about the earth. I think this is one of the major flaws that we make in this dialogue. Republicans are terrible at this because many of them are afraid to say the earth's changing and man has influenced it. They don't get a seat at the table and they miss a tremendous opportunity. I've said a long time ago, the climate's changing and man's influencing it, right? But why do you insist that that's my motivation for taking care of the earth? So I really wish we could understand that rarely motivates somebody. And what motivates somebody is generally more emotions. People don't join the church because of science. Imagine if we put that bar up, that you can't join the church unless the science motivates you. So I'm not sure that was really the intent of his question, but I really just want to push back on this concept. And I feel like too often it's a litmus test. This whole science thing is a litmus test. And if you fail a litmus test, you can't join the I Care About the Earth Club. And it really should have nothing to do with that. It should be, do you care about the earth? Sorry. Ben, bring us back.
Well, I'm gonna agree and also disagree. I would say, first of all, science, like religion, is a search for better knowledge. And we have to recognize that if science is a search for knowledge, we also recognize that implicit in that is we don't have a perfect knowledge. And so science is always learning and always developing, and we want more information. And that's what the scientific process is all about. You know, I have, so I kind of glossed over it, but this legislation that I passed relating to air quality, I'm on the science committee. And so where I said, let me, before I get there, I'm going to agree and then disagree with Congressman Curtis. I agree. Science is not, we're in politics. Science is not a powerful motivator for people. So it's not the best why. The why is my kids and preserving places that are special to me. It's the emotion that is powerful. Science is maybe a better why. Those emotional reasons are a better why for why I care about the environment. Now, I'm not negating science, because some of what science tells us, even as our knowledge is imperfect, some of what science tells us is on the horizon is scary and can be motivating. But I do believe, like Congressman Curtis, that emotional reasons and what I care about for me and my family and memories and heritage, that is a more powerful motivator for human beings than dry, boring science out of a book. So I agree in that regard. I'm on the science committee though. So let me tell you, I was gonna just say about my legislation. I think science is powerful about how we care about the earth. Maybe it's not the most powerful motivator for why, but I think it is important in the how. So, you know, we all know Utah has air quality problems. One of the issues that, and we've made some progress in recent years, we've got a long way to go, but we've actually, the science will tell us we've made some progress in cleaning our air. One of the areas though where our air has gotten worse is our summertime pollution. So when we think of air quality, we think of those wintertime inversions. In the summer, we actually have seen spikes in air quality, and it's ozone pollution. So ozone, you're not going to often see a big cloud of haze on the horizon, but it's there. Ozone is naturally occurring. It's not, but we've seen it spike. And so the question is, as we've been doing a better job of reducing pollution, why are we seeing ozone increases? So science would tell us, so ozone is naturally occurring. It actually, sunlight makes ozone. So why is it spiking? Well, probably we're guessing, you know, the scientific guess would be warmer days, longer, hotter days, more hot days is going to create more ozone. Forest fires create ozone. And then we know that actually a lot of the ozone that's coming and getting trapped in inversions along the Wasatch Front is coming from Asia. So ozone can be deadly in the doses that we're seeing during the summer. There are deaths that are attributed to these spikes in ozone. So if we say it's something we care about and we want to address it, now my question is, how do we address it? And that's where science comes in. I don't know, is the answer, what is the answer? Well, the first step in addressing our ozone pollution is to understand what are the biggest drivers, where it's coming from, and where can we have the biggest impact. So my legislation puts funding in the National Academies of Sciences to get to the bottom of this question, to help us to understand where Utah's summertime ozone pollution is coming from, and that will tell us then how to address it. So I think science is really important in the how we go about addressing climate change, on whether it's ozone pollution or so many other things.
That's excellent. Thank you. You were not disagreeable, which is something we can all learn from. Thank you for modeling that.
Just for the record, I totally agree with Congressman McAdams. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we put so much hinges on whether or not you get to be part of the club based upon how you view the science. And we're leaving a lot of people out of the club who would care deeply about the Earth, except for we insist that to join the club, that they follow the science instead of following their heart. So that's my point, is really we've got to be thoughtful in how we talk about this. Of course, science is important. By the way, I believe in the science. I believe what science is telling us about how we're destroying the Earth and how man has done it. But many people struggle with that, and therefore, but they still would be important parts, important members in the dialogue.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Where you both come from local government, I'm going to take advantage of that. Tell us, what can citizens do at the local level to be great stewards and to advocate or lobby or contribute to solving global climate change?
Ben, do you mind if I take this first? And because I'm trying to get to my grandson's soccer game. So if you don't mind, I'd like to take this, and then Shannon, I'll peel off. Let me share with you something that I think will make you all smile. In Utah, about every block has a church on it, right? Or close to it. And on any given Sunday, if you look at that church parking lot, it's going to be full of cars. We know that circumference of members attending that church is probably 3 or 4 blocks, right? And if I'm truthful, not only does the Curtis family frequently take a car 2 or 3 blocks to church, we might take 2 or 3 cars, 2 or 3 blocks to church. Right? And people smile at this because we're all guilty. And the reason I bring this up to answer your question is, don't forget the little things. Imagine if every family walked to church instead of driving. In Utah County, we have 500,000 people. If we could reduce per week 500,000 vehicle trips simply by that one small thing, those add up. And I think sometimes we underestimate the small things and what we do by changing our light bulbs, by getting an electric lawnmower, by walking to church. And that's too often we look to Washington, D.C. for this one answer that will just fix everything. And so that's I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you, Representative Curtis, and thanks for taking the time to spend on this Saturday morning.
Shannon, you're the best. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think Congressman Curtis is a great leader. We're lucky to have him, and I consider him a great colleague that I enjoy working with in the House of Representatives. I think he's right to talk about taking individual responsibility. In Utah, we have this rugged individualism that was forged as in the West and with our pioneer heritage, that we oftentimes talk about kind of a do-it-ourselves type attitude. And I think it's worth reminding people that, that just like wearing a mask, being responsible for the environment is not because they told us to, it's because I can do this and I'm going to do my part mentality that I think is such a powerful narrative for who we are. And Congressman Curtis is right that it's a lot of little things make a difference. Speaking specifically about air quality along the Wasatch Front. So part of the reason that it's been so hard for us to make meaningful progress in improving our air is, over 50% of our air quality in our wintertime inversions is caused by cars. So you're talking about changing the behavior of 1 million people. And, it's not about shutting down one manufacturing plant or, things like that. Those decisions like that, I think, would be easier. But when you're talking about changing the behavior of millions of people and their livelihoods are at stake, it's a harder thing to do. So at an individual level, I think it's making choices to minimize our impact and to do our part. I think at the policy level, solutions, you say, think globally, act locally. It's just like, the air quality and climate change are the same problem. It's just a local expression of a global problem, right? So if we're going to address our air quality, it requires things at the federal level. I think what the federal government has done and now undone, without getting too much into the partisan politics of that, under the previous administration, under the Obama administration, there was a regulation imposed by the Environmental Protection Agency to make all cars more fuel efficient. So more fuel efficient cars, not only great for our pocketbook, we spend less on gas because we get more miles per gallon, but it also means less pollution per mile. So as the Wasatch Front is growing so fast and we are adding more cars to the road every day, if we can make those cars less polluting, we're gonna, part of the reason, we've reduced pollution and seen our air quality get the same or worse over time. It's because as we become cleaner, there are also more of us. And so that's why the problem gets worse. But if we can make our cars, significantly more fuel efficient and less polluting, that's going to reduce that pollution. So at the federal level, what we would say is we want automobile manufacturers to invest in research and technology that's going to make cars more fuel efficient. And they do that, and you see those policies then just through their natural course. When I buy a new car, it pollutes less, and it's not even about changing my behavior, it's about new options on the table. And I mentioned the other bill that I passed was investing in solar energy research. So clean, renewable energy has to be part of our future. We have to move to a clean energy economy. Now, as people right now have the option to maybe put solar on your home and, with government incentives and state incentives and federal incentives, that can be done at kind of a break-even proposition right now. So people will choose that. We need to get to the point that it is more cheaper to go with clean energy than it is to go with polluting energy. And that's going to happen, but it's going to take science again. So investing in the scientific research to make those clean energy technologies more reliable and cheaper to manufacture as part of it. So these are all things to do at the federal level. I'm going to just say one more, and this is another actually piece of legislation. I'm going to say not to self-promote, but it is to self-promote, but that's, you asked me here. So a bill that I have that we have a lot of oil and gas that comes off of lands here in Utah and across the country, right? So, and I'm not opposed to oil and gas. I know that probably there are people on the call who are. I do believe that we will, over time, transition to a clean energy economy where clean, renewable energy is cheaper and better than carbon-based energy, but we're not there yet. And so, but one of the things that I think is important is that we don't subsidize, if we want to transition there and we know that we're going to get there eventually, let's not subsidize the carbon-based energy. So I have a piece of legislation that would update lease revenue. So the federal government leases land for extraction of natural gas. Those have not been adjusted. Those leases have not been adjusted for inflation in over 100 years. So imagine if you were living in an apartment and your landlord hasn't changed rent in 100 years. That'd be a sweetheart deal for an apartment. And that's what's happening with oil and gas is these leases on oil and gas have not been updated. And so you can lease this land from the federal government for prices that are over 100 years old. So my legislation would bring it up to roughly match what the state of Utah is charging. The state of Utah leases Utah-owned lands for oil and gas extraction, and the federal government should at least charge what the other states are charging. So we would update that to just say, let's stop the subsidy, and that would actually have the effect of also making the taxpayers whole. I think it's the taxpayers right now who are losing out by not charging a fair value for lease on those lands. So let's not subsidize carbon-based energy. Let's provide incentives for people to, for markets to develop around clean and renewable energy. And then over time, I think that transition will happen. So at the federal level, it's providing choices and making those choices less expensive and more reliable so that people can choose that without taking, if we're requiring people to make enormous sacrifices to choose clean and renewable energy. Some people are going to do that, but it's never going to happen at a scale that you're going to see it have a measurable impact on climate change. So federal level, I think policies like that. At the state level is similar. We can incentivize transitions to clean, renewable energy. I think fortunately in Utah, we can do that in a way that actually will grow jobs and grow our economy, because we do have a strong solar energy sector here. And we are a place where we have capacity to have more jobs. So it's actually, I think, would be good for our economy to move in that direction as well. And then the state of Utah also has regulations on some of the gas production refineries here to produce tier 3 fuels that will also reduce pollution and carbon emissions. And then I think local cities jurisdiction has I think a responsibility to provide choices that make it convenient. Right now, we want people to choose to walk or bike if that's a choice that they will make. And yet, far too often we design cities that are completely hostile to walking and hostile to biking. And so let's think about how we design our cities. People want to make this choice. There are people who don't, and I think we need to provide choices for people who want to live in a car-oriented suburban community. That's okay. But we can also have choices for people who want to live in a walkable community, you know, where transit's accessible, where biking's accessible, and you know, and can make that choice as well. So allowing choices that are less environmentally impactful is what happens at the local level. And then I think at the individual and family level, it's doing what we can to avail ourselves of the options that would help to reduce our individual footprint and contribution to climate change and all the impacts that has.